Wrestling is a very special entity. Using the word fake is stupid because it really hurts, and I know this firsthand, but because every match is chatted about beforehand, there's a huge opportunity to be creative, even when it comes to a wrestler's character. You can literally do anything you want with that as well. If everyone involved agrees, you can be a spaceman, a walking penis, a porn star, a serial killer. No one questions it, no one bats an eyelid, it's just another gimmick through the door, and we judge it based on how it plays out on TV. Very strange, right? We have now become so accepted of this though, we let the most crazy things go, but let's change that right now. I'm Simon from WhatCulture, and this is 10 ridiculous wrestling gimmicks that were actually true. Number 10, Thurman Sparky Plugg. When the soon-to-be Bob Holly joined the WWE in 1994, he was told he was going to be a NASCAR driver. This makes no sense. If he does that for a living, why is he spending all his time in a wrestling ring? But no, here Vince McMahon had decided he needed a pro racer in his ranks, so gave birth to Thurman Sparky Plugg. What kind of name is that too? And the inclusion of Sparky is just a slap around the face. Like innuendo throwing up on you. Holly asked Vince to at least change said name, but we know how that went. Although on a more positive note, he was given a customized car, so I guess it wasn't all bad. Even more so, as this was dead as soon as it got going. Number 9, the Big Bossman. We forget this now, but when Ray Traylor debuted as the Big Bossman in 1988, he was a bad guy. A corrupt cop, fans were perfectly happy to accept a dodgy policeman as the real deal, as he handcuffed his opponents after matches and then whooped their ass. That is pretty damning. The inspiration for the character was that the man behind the truncheon had been a warden down in Cobb County, Georgia, until he decided to trade prison bars for arm bars. Before long, he became a super good guy and held up American values as he swore loyal to Old Glory, but originally, we were meant to believe an officer of the law would just leave his precinct every evening to beat somebody up illegally. I'm pretty sure being given handcuffs doesn't mean you can then arrest non-criminals and try to kill them. Something there doesn't add up. Number 8, Pallbearer. Anytime this comes up, we all have to admit that if we were kids when we first heard of Pallbearer, the name was lost on us. It was on me anyway. How stupid is that? I should have automatically failed all my exams. When the real-life Paul Moody walked into McMahon's office in 1990 though, he was a well-versed manager who'd been doing this thing for 16 years. The only time he had taken off was when his first son was born, and somewhat coincidentally, during this, he had trained as a qualified mortician. You can just imagine Vince's face when he heard that, and before you knew it, Pallbearer was born. The perfect accomplice to the brand new gimmick known as The Undertaker, Bearer would serve as the mouthpiece for the dead man, even if he did have the silliest name in wrestling history. The pun was the brainchild of Road Warrior Hawk 2, so really as ludicrous as the Undertaker character was, all of this was bedded in more reality than a lot of roles of the era. It probably would have worked even without Percy, such was Mark Calloway's dedication to the role, but there's no doubt this pairing was like finding gold to the point we are still talking about it today. Number 7, General Adnan. This story is amazing. When you think of General Adnan, you probably remember him being part of the ridiculous stable, also featuring Sergeant Slaughter and the Iron Sheik, as they waged war against the USA as the Gulf War was happening. Still unbelievable now, and all of this was going down in 1991. When it comes to Adnan though, his story is far more fascinating. Instead of just being told to pretend he was from distant lands, he actually was from Iraq, and furthermore, was buddies with Saddam Hussein. They had gone to school together, and for a while there, he was a confidant of the man. Hussein even asked Adnan to bring wrestling to the country in the 1970s, but as Saddam's documented paranoia increased, he decided the general was a rival, triggering Adnan to leave the country and take up residence in the US of A. I mean, that is quite the tale, right? How he then felt pledging allegiance to someone who he thought may actually try and kill him is a question we'll never have the answer to, but that is wrestling, folks. The line is so far off into the distance you can't even see it. Number 6, the Maestro. Robert Kellam was the great-nephew of one Gorgeous George, a wrestler that pretty much changed the industry. He wasn't allowed to have any association with that when he popped up in WCW in the 90s, because Randy Savage insisted his valet was called Gorgeous George. That meant Eric Bischoff had to go to the creative well, and the result was the Maestro. This meant he was going to wear a cape and wave a baton around, which was never going to main event WrestleMania, now was it? He also came to the ring with Alicia Webb on his arm, who you may know better as Ryan Shamrock in WWE, and I guess we were meant to think that when he wasn't locking up, he was dealing with a group of musicians, because Why not? Of course. There was some background here at least. Kellen was a trained pianist and had starred on stage by performing in the likes of Shakespeare's Macbeth and Hamlet. Clearly that didn't carry across. After a 50-50 feud with Ernest Miller, his contract expired, and we never saw him again. Wrestling makes no sense. Number 5, Dean Douglas. In 1995, Shane Douglas had found a way to make a splash. It had started by throwing the very valued NWA title to the floor under Paul Heyman's instructions in ECW, but it did work. From nowhere, all the organizations that had shirked him before were back on the phone. They wanted a piece of Douglas. It was WWE that piqued his interest, as it did for a lot of guys back then, but unfortunately for Shane, they had other ideas. Because everybody had to have an over-the-top gimmick then, no matter what their history, he became Dean Douglas, which, yes, meant he was a teacher. He would assess and mark his opponents before a match. It was the most mid-90s things you could have gotten from WWE. The problem started when Douglas told Vince McMahon that he had trained in this discipline before putting on the tights, and that again is all the CEO needed. Shane was tutoring before he knew it, and unsurprisingly, the fans didn't care. An angry teacher wasn't really something to get behind. He even had a paddle he would spank his enemies with, which just sounds creepy now, and it was called the Board of Education. Get it? Awful, I tell you. Just awful. Number 4, Clarence Mason. When you first see Clarence Mason, he of Jim Cornette legal team fame, you likely think of O.J. Simpson's lawyer Johnny Cochran, and that's because this was the whole point. This case was still ongoing when he was introduced, which is pretty incredible, and even after it was done, WWE thought about using O.J. at WrestleMania. Thankfully, even they saw sense on that one. To be fair to WWE, they did put some thought into this. His name was a play on both a real lawyer, Clarence Darrow, and a fake one, Perry Mason, and the man who played this guy was a prospective attorney at one time. Herman Stevens was all ready for a job in this profession until he decided sports entertainment would be better, and then somehow he managed to combine both, but that is wrestling for you. After arriving with Cornette, he then joined the Nation of Domination, but left the company when he got quite uncomfortable with the racial tone of the faction's storylines. I can understand that. It was a bit full on for a while there. Stevens would soon get to play the same role in WCW until actually deciding he should go and practice law for real. What a topsy-turvy journey that was. Number 3, Tal Hopper. WWE must have thought kids would have swallowed anything in the 90s, hence Tal Hopper. Why? Because he was a wrestling plumber. You can just see the creative team going through jobs they'd already dished out and then celebrating when they realized that a plumber was free and available. While you'd think this was just Vince McMahon throwing these out like someone had a gun to his head, this was actually the doing of the person behind the wrench, Tony Anthony. Given that Dusty Rhodes had famously said he was the son of a plumber, which wasn't 100% accurate, Tony thought as he was legit the offspring of a plumber that he could make this work for real in the squared circle. I mean, how better to become the real blue-collar champion? This did not achieve said goal, and he was basically out the door as soon as he arrived. You could even say he was flushed down the U-bend, but we aren't going to do that because it's stupid and would make us sound ridiculous. Number 2, Jimmy Hart. When the Honky Tonk Man became a right asshole in 1986, he went and got Jimmy Hart as his manager. The idea, of course, was that Honky was bad guy Elvis and that Jimmy was bad guy Colonel Tom Parker, and the two would roam the 7 seas being musical dicks. It also did help that Hart was already being billed as from Memphis, Tennessee. This was a solid move as well because it wasn't superficial. The megaphone-wielding manager had been the leading man in a rock group known as the Gentrys before he got into wrestling, and he would write a lot of theme songs for performers over the years, including one Shawn Michaels. He even had a hit with Keep On Dancing, so he did have success in this field. So he was putting his background to good use, and while WCW would try a similar gimmick later on with their own Tom Parker, who was called Robert Parker, he was teamed with Steve Austin. Nope, that one is out of nowhere, but that was World Championship Wrestling. Number 1, Britt Baker. Or should I say Dr. Britt Baker, who is doing dentistry right. We all remember when Jerry Lawler brought in his own personal teeth guy, Isaac Yankem, in 1995 to feud with Bret Hart, and the big question was as to why a man who's probably earning a decent 6-figure salary was also mad at the Hitman. He clearly wasn't right of mind and therefore shouldn't have had a practice to begin with. And maybe you could say the same thing about Baker, but you can't because she actually is a dentist. When she's not slamming fools, that's what she does. When you can play off real life in that way, you absolutely should. You can still ask why she wants to combine both roles, but I now say, why the hell not? We should never be defined by one thing, and spreading your wings is important. I also just think it's cool. It takes a lot of training to be both a dentist and a wrestler, and somehow Britt is doing both. More power to her. Know of any other ridiculous gimmicks that were actually true? And my word, there must be loads of them. Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like the video, share the video, and subscribe. Then head over to WhatCulture.com and read yourself some articles, and follow WhatCulture on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. My name is Simon from WhatCulture, and I will talk to you again soon.